and welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining me tonight is the wonderful Harry Weinger, Vice President of A&R for Universal Music Enterprises, the catalog arm of Universal Music Group. Harry has developed and or produced hundreds of releases for dozens of artists like Marvin Gaye, Bob Marley, Bon Jovi, and the Jackson 5. He's also co-produced the Grammy Award-winning soundtrack to Standing in the Shadows of Motown, as well as the Grammy-nominated soundtrack to Get On Up, starring the late Chadwick Boseman. For Broadway, he's co-executive produced the original cast recordings for the Tony Award-winning and Tony Award-nominated productions of respectively Ain't Too Proud and Motown the Musical. And most recently, he's been consulting on several music documentaries to premiere in 2023, so make sure to keep an eye out for those. So Harry, I'm so excited to have you join us. How's it going?
It's going good. I'm so happy to see you doing these things and all the things you're doing in your life since we first met all those years ago.
I know it's crazy. Okay, are you ready for the first question?
I am.
Imagine for a second you're sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What's one piece of advice you would give him on a personal note, and what one piece of advice would you give him from a business perspective?
Like everybody you've been talking to, I've been thinking a lot about this and who I was in that moment. I was doing some things professionally, at that age. But if I could go back and sort of be in the room or be a voice in that person's head, I would say, get to it. Just get to it. Because I remember thinking, it's going to be great when I'm older. I think, well, some of that worked out for me because I blossomed a lot when I was older. But I think, this idea of getting to what you want and really, you're trying so hard to figure things out. The main thing is to be open, to stay open, because your energy, like your passion for stuff when you're young, it can lead to amazing things. Doors open that you didn't expect because you have a certain passion. And, it's like when you're shopping for sneakers, how come everybody in the street is wearing the sneaker that you're looking, you just, because you're so focused on it. And I think if you have energy for something and you're really focused on it, it's amazing what can happen. Professionally, the main thing for me that I didn't understand at the time is ask for help. Because if you're encountering people in the business, most of them are really excited to be doing what they're doing and they want to be helpful. And I think you can lean into it. I think you can lean on having mentors or a mentor or mentors, because one day you can be one. I relish that role now. And, if you feel like you don't have connections, make them. You called me out of the blue through a connection that we had. And here we are. We didn't have to be talking every day in the years in between, but we made a connection. And it proved fruitful later for you. So, I would always encourage yourself to find a way, get to somebody who you can ask questions of. It's not that hard.
So, speaking of connections and building relationships, I know we touched on the beginning that you've delved into the world of Broadway. How did that come about?
Because I lived in New York. Literally, at the time, I was working a lot, and I still do, with the Motown catalog and all the artists in the Motown catalog. And I'm very embedded in the culture. And I was actually told by somebody who was at Motown for a long time, you're one of us now, there's no going back. And there isn't. You're one of the family. So when the musical happened, and I was living in New York, it seemed to me to be obvious that I would get to go to previews and see what they were doing, since Universal was going to be doing the cast album. UME particularly was going to be handling the cast album. Also, frankly, I grew up listening to Broadway because the time I was a young person, that was the main avenue of entertainment, especially for my parents. They went to shows all the time, and then they dragged us to shows. I can't tell you how many shows I've seen that are legendary, that are, I saw Bette Midler in Fiddler on the Roof or something like that, So, I went to the Wiz 3 times, and I saw the revival of Annie Get Your Gun, and it goes on and on and on and on. So Broadway was another kind of language in my household. And cast albums, when I was little, were the biggest selling records in the country. So they were around all the time. So for Motown to have a musical and for Berry Gordy to have tell that story and have artists who were embodying Smokey or Marvin or the Temptations or or Eddie Holland and Brian Holland and the producers was an extraordinary thing to see. And then to capture it, I was very happy to be part of it. So now it's sort of become, oh, I'll do the Broadway stuff. It was, oh, I like Broadway. I mean, I've been involved in Broadway since I was a little kid, emotionally. And then it was proximity. And then it was the added context of it being Motown. So that's what happened.
That's a great story. Okay, jumping into question two. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and we all know that it's no different in the music industry. And sometimes people think that's a bad thing, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it can be good. So, what's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry or catalog specifically?
A lot of your guests have already said this, so I'm going to second that emotion, which is that it's hard work. And a lot of most often people see the results. They'll see the pretty album cover, or they'll see a story about a Janet Jackson project that I worked on and wasn't that great. Well, you have no idea the months of research and work and the wrangling that goes into a project. I mean, it's fun, but there's many, many hours, and there's really no clock in the music business, especially if you're doing any work in a studio at any time. If you have the privilege and the opportunity to be in a studio, there's no clock. You're just working. Time goes away. But that's just true. It really is. There's a lot of mental work and a lot of research, time, effort, hand-holding, psychology, love for the topic. And if there's not a lot of love for the topic, there's just the skill and craft you put into something to make it great. You don't want to let down, whether someone is alive or dead, you don't want to let down anyone's legacy or the fans. The fans, I have, sometimes people reach out to me and say, I'm their biggest fan. Yeah, you are. You know more than I do sometimes, right? And so I can't let them down. But the thing I really wanted to talk about is that so often I hear this from other people not in the business say, well, it's who you know. Well, I didn't know anybody. You have to make these connections, right? If you don't have connections, there's a way to make them if your passion carries you there. And you never know where a connection will come from. Again, I really think your passion leads you somewhere. But I do think this idea of who you know is valid in the sense that, and hang in with me, a lot of the music we listen to is personal. Like Marvin Gaye singing What's Going On, I Want You, Let's Get It On, is personal, right? Songs written for the Temptations, while it's not about David Ruffin or Otis Williams or Eddie Kendricks, the person writing those songs has made something deeply personal. So who you know and the relationship you have to the music, the relationship you have to the artist can be a deep thing. And so it behooves you to make it personal and make it something where you connect with somebody emotionally. Even if it's just work, you're connecting. I did a presentation the other day where I just felt in the room, everybody knew their role, everybody had a job to do, and it was incredible. Because we took this assignment seriously. So I developed relationships with everybody in the room so that we would come together. So if you're starting out and you feel like you don't know anybody, you never know who knows who, and you email a guy or a girl, a person or a woman, they, them, he, who, she, you just can reach out to people and find ways to make connections. It is who you know, but in a real way that connects to the music, I think. Give more of yourself and listen to other people so that you can make connections.
Yeah, I know we touched on earlier that you've known me for a couple of years. So for the people, I'll say Harry is the reason that I started on the path that I am currently on now, because you got me
And
into
you did,
the best string of internships.
yeah, and you didn't even intern for me.
I
right?
know.
You
No.
went to a different internship, but we stay connected. So
Yep,
yeah,
definitely. Well, last question. Here we go. Throughout your career, I can only imagine you've been asked plenty of questions, whether for some conferences, the media, or maybe even a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, I'll bet there was one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So, what is that question and what would be your answer?
a lot of people ask me, how did you get into the business? No one has ever asked me why. Why did you get into the business? Why would you go through all this? Why would you have a job with no clock? Why would you have to tell your significant other, I'll be home at 6 and you get home at 8? Why does the phone ring on a Friday night at 8 o'clock and it's an artist or a manager and they don't have a clock? Why are you doing this? Why are you talking to the lighting director, the assistant engineer? Well, this is, why are you hanging around at a Broadway stage 11:30 with the sound design engineer? It's interesting. It's part of the gig. I'm making it part of the gig, but it's interesting. Why? And I think it becomes the only thing you can do. Like plan B is gone. You really have plan A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And uh, I just want to expand on that a little bit, which is when I was coming up, there were no courses at universities or colleges on the music industry. And I made it through. Now there are plenty of courses, and I taught some. And this is not to disparage any of these courses because they're highly valuable. I have an intern now who knows more than I ever did at, this mystical age of 25 you're talking about. And she's 20. She knows way more about audio. She knows way more about the business. She knows way more about publishing than I've ever come to understand. And she's got a huge leg up. I think what you can't teach is the hanging in there and making these connections and wanting it to be your only, it's the passion. And, I've run into several young people who, what I took this course on, okay, what are you going to do with it? The fact that you took this series of classes doesn't mean anything unless you apply it and find a way to make it, to own it. So for me, once I got the taste of it, I did college radio and I would talk to I was music director of my station. I would talk to the labels every week to get product. Because in college, you didn't automatically get product back in the day. You had to beg for it. So I talked to the labels every week. I liked what they did every day. I liked being around the music, and became the driving force.
So, before we go, I know that everybody sometimes is curious what an A&R role looks like in a catalog division. So can you briefly explain that?
Sure. So an A&R person for a frontline label signs new artists, develops new artists, works with current artists who maybe already have some traction and some bit of legacy to move them in one direction or another or help them with the vision that they have. In catalog, you're working with repertoire that's what we call pre-sold. I mean, I'm not signing Marvin Gaye, right? Or James Brown, one of the great catalogs of all time that I've worked a lot with, for the first thing I worked on when I started. And I know just in my DNA, it's sort of this thing that's in me now. You are managing the legacy from a creative viewpoint, and you're helping to tell the story through the music. So if you turn to the commercial team and say, hey, we have, Let's Get It On, 50th anniversary is next year. For them, what does that mean? What do you want to do? What is your vision of what you think you should do? And there's a collaborative discussion with marketing and them and publicity and commercial about what do we do around that? Because there's an existing album, but is there more? Is there anything missing? It's streaming. Are we missing anything physically? And I can come to them and say, well, the story of the album is XYZ. came after a soundtrack. It's it's the number one love song of all time. But there's more to the backstory, and I have a narrative out of a book or liner notes that I did previously. And by the way, there may be some other things from the sessions that we can look at. And what sort of quote unquote product does that become? But it comes out of telling the story. I worked for Bob Marley's 75. It was a long campaign where I had just come into the fold of working on this quote, this great artist and celebrating his birthday/anniversary. And it really was for me a job of educating everybody to say, you may know Three Little Birds, Jamming, Is This Love? Let me lay out all of the albums. Here are all the albums. Here are they all in a spreadsheet. Here's all the audio. Here are all the highlights. Here are the covers. So when we have conversations with the family, when we have conversations among each other, it's my job to tell that story. And you're just responsible for, there's a foundational aspect to it, right? Here are the albums, or here's this one album, here's what this album is all about. And then there's a flow from that of what else can we do with that? What do you as an A&R person know about the story that we can add on that would enhance it? Can we do a video? Can we do a deluxe edition? Can we do whatever? So literally artist and repertoire.
Amazing. Great description. Thank you so much for that. Well, Harry, it has been so great having you on tonight. I appreciate you taking the time to chat. And to all of my listeners, I know you enjoyed hearing from Harry just as much as I enjoyed speaking with him. So stay tuned for next week's episode of 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking 3 powerful questions. See you next time.